Welcome to Wednesday Forever, a look back on the comics that influenced a generation. I'm your host, Michael Dolce, joined by my co-host extraordinaire, Mr. Victor Dandridge. Victor, how you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Doing really, really good. Today we are privileged to have the creator of many, many books, the writer of many, many books, for today's topic, which is X-Force #1. We've got Fabian Nicieza, the writer and the co-creator of Deadpool, on to talk to us about X-Force #1. Fabian, how you doing, sir?
I am doing very well, thank you, gentlemen. How are you guys?
We are doing great. So Wednesday Forever, we basically just like to talk about these great comics, especially comics that influenced us as a kid, or influenced a generation of artists or writers or whatever the case might be. And immediately, some of the books that came to mind, and the ability that we know we can have you on the show, was we got to talk to you about X-Force.
Yes,
you and I have privately had conversations about the process. For everyone out there, this show is not necessarily a director's cut. It's more about the process. It's more about going in and learning the stories behind these great comics. So real quick, just to paint a picture, X-Force #1 was my very first X-Men book. One of the reasons I chose it. It was the first time I bought something that wasn't a Mutant Ninja Turtle or a Spider-Man book. And it was something that, it jumped off. I can distinctly remember walking into Wizard the comic shop. Yes, there's Wizard World, the comic book convention, and there was a Wizard magazine. But before there was all that, there was Wizard the comic shop, which turned into all that. And I remember kind of eyeing it on the corner rack. So I know it came out in June of 1991, and it was somewhere in the summertime. But so it had already hit. It was at the time the top selling comic of all time before X-Men.
It might have been. I'm trying to remember whether it was May or June. I think it was June.
Yeah.
Because X-Men #1 came out 2 months later.
In August.
Yeah.
Yep, in August.
Which makes it super meta because, literally the first caption is June 4th in the book, which is how you plan that. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Well, Victor, in all honesty, we knew when the books were shipping.
No. Sometimes, artists get you backed up. The fact that you could have that in there and it hit right on, that's a miracle.
Maybe it was just my way of writing something in script that would force Rob to finish the book on time.
And that's
the pressure was on him.
Wait, he said June 4th. Oh my God.
Yeah. Crap,
let's go back to your involvement, which started in New Mutants, right? Yeah. So New Mutants 98, I think, was the first one you scripted. How did you end up getting...
I scripted 93, which was an issue Louise had plotted. But my first... Technically, we started as a team with issue 98.
Okay. How did that come about? How did you end up getting involved in the first place?
Long story short, Rob was going to be allowed to start plotting and drawing the book himself. Louise was going to be removed from the title. They wanted a scripter with Rob because he was 21 years old, and he and the editorial didn't think he was ready for that. They had a list of different people, and they either settled on me or chose me, whatever, and they asked me if I wanted to do it. I was already writing 2 books a month for Marvel, plus a staff job, and I said yes because I knew it was going to sell well. I thought it would be fun, and I thought, and I knew that scripting off of someone else's plots is tremendously easier than fully writing a book yourself. So quite honestly, it was going to be a nice additional paycheck. I didn't know that I knew it was going to sell more. I knew it because I was the advertising manager. I understood where these things were working. But I didn't think it was going to do what it did. So the paychecks were much bigger than I expected, which offset quite a bit of the pain and agony. So those were all the reasons. Ultimately, it's a simple combination. Are you going to have fun, and is it going to be worth it, i.e. the money? And the answer at the time for me was yes. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be worth the money.
It's funny. You just said something that I thought was interesting, and Victor, maybe chime in as well too. You said it's easier to work off someone else's plot to script. I got to be honest, actually. So I reread the issue in preparation for the interview. I reread the first, 10 issues, to be honest with you, and I actually find that your script was so punchy and in a good way that there's an art form to that I think you actually pulled off really well, that I think it would be almost harder to do something like that. Like, how much leeway were you given to do these kind of, to come up with the script? Like, take us through that process.
It all depends on the working scenario. I've scripted off of other people's plots before, and it really depends on the nature of the plot. It depends on the nature of the artist drawing it.
Mm-hmm.
I've scripted when a writer has plotted and then the artist drew the pages. I've scripted when the plotter was the artist, like with Rob or with Alan Davis. And it really varies because it's not a formula. It's not a math problem. It depends on what the artist puts into the plot. It depends on what the artist puts into the pages. A lot of artists put little border notes with their own ideas. Some don't.
Okay.
And it really varies. And the working process on X-Force varied quite a bit from New Mutants 98 through whatever Rob's last issue plotting was. Issue 13, I think, was the last one he plotted. The last one he drew, I think, was issue 6.
Okay.
I mean, he did layouts on the Mignola issue, but it was really, it was just panel breakdown layouts for Mike to follow. So I got to be honest with you, every month was a little bit different because the schedule determined what I would be getting. When we had more time on the schedule, I got much more fully fleshed out, 8.5 by 11 panel breakdowns with notes all over them.
Wow.
And that was the beginning. Later, it got looser and looser and looser. And my script got snarkier and pissier because it devolved into a working process that wasn't comfortable. For the most part, at the beginning, the working process was okay.
Mm-hmm.
I look at X-Force the first year and I watch the devolution of my interest in participating in the creative process in that manner. So I never look at it as a positive because I think it started positively and just sort of petered out. When I think of X-Force, I'm thinking of issues 14 through 25 with Greg Capullo. I'm thinking of watching Tony Daniels become better and better and better as an artist as he goes along. I got to be honest with you. We can talk about it, and it's Wednesday Forever, which I find ironic because the books didn't come out on Wednesday back then. But I never think of X-Force as issues 1 through 12 or 1 through 13 as much as I think of it as the other stuff. And it's quite frankly, it's understandable because the other stuff is what I was putting a lot more of myself creatively into as opposed to the first year.
I think that actually segues really well to my follow-up, which was in terms of the characters that you had to work with, did you like them to begin with? Because there is like a cool attitude that they have, but at the same time, there is kind of a hands-offness in that the first couple of issues that you're still building mystery. So it kind of works, but did you like them to begin with?
Some of them, yes, and some of them, no. And it was difficult because, you when you're writing, you can only script or allude to what you're aware of. Mm-hmm. So to give you an example, a perfect example, and it's one that I think worked out well, but isn't necessarily the way it should have worked. If Rob had planned for Domino to be a plant the whole time, if he had planned for it to be Vanessa disguised as Domino, he never told me.
Wow.
So I never knew until the plot came, the rough breakdown of pages with the plot came in, where it revealed that the real Domino was chained up in a cave somewhere, which is an odd place to keep a hostage, but okay. And so in hindsight, that works out better because all I'm doing is scripting Domino as the character I think she's supposed to be, which is good because that's what Vanessa should be doing. But by the same token, had I known in advance, and again, I don't know for sure if Rob knew in advance. It might have been an idea that came up later, which is also totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. You just got to make sure you cover your tracks behind you, that you didn't screw that up. I didn't know. I would have scripted a little bit differently had I known. I could have laid a couple more clues. I could have been a little subtler with a couple things, just to play off of that, If you don't know where a character is going, it's very hard to script them as if they're aware, you know. So
Right.
as the scripter on X-Force, one of the reasons it's so threadbare, so light, so fluffy, it was twofold. Number one, we knew the audience we were selling to. We knew we were selling to 10 to 14-year-old boys. We knew it, and that's fine. Yeah. And again, there was a lot of criticism about it then, and there's a lot of criticism about it now. And my attitude to that criticism, you're all idiots. We're selling comics to 10 to 14-year-old boys, and we're selling hundreds of thousands of copies of 10 to 14-year-old boys.
Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing? Is you're supposed to be getting 10 to 14-year-olds excited?
You're supposed to be doing? Yeah. We as an industry have totally abandoned that, and the current generation of creators, they wouldn't even know how to write a comic for a 10-year-old boy. It's anathema to them. God forbid that, you know, the character staring out a window at the rain, depressed for 9 panels. It's not going to work for 10-year-old boys, you know. So I was scripting to the audience we knew we were selling to, and that wasn't the 30-year-old at that time man boys who had grown up with New Mutants through the 80s. It really was to the new audience of kids that were coming in as a result of Rob's artwork. So that was the main reason I did it the way I did it. The other reason I did it the way I did it is because I simply didn't know, probably 75% of the time, what a storyline thread was going to turn out to be, where a character direction was going. Because between Rob's working method and my schedule, it didn't really allow us the opportunity to really hone in on that. Our conversations lessened more and more as we went along. We talked a lot at the beginning. We talked a lot less as we went along. And again, it was a combination of how he was working, the fact he was already planning to start a brand new company, which takes a tremendous amount of work, attention, effort, everything else. And the fact that I was writing 2 books a month and I had a full-time job, you know? So I did treat it the way I treated it. I won't say the way it deserved to be treated, but I treated it the way that I had to be expected to treat it, as just the scripter of the book. If the plotter's not going to tell me what the plot's going to be 5 issues down the road, okay, I'm going to script to what's right in front of my face.
Sure.
And what was right in front of my face was a lot of giant arms and thighs and explosions and pounding, and so that's what I scripted to.
I actually have a bunch of questions, but it's funny you mentioned that too. So I reread it last night, and I have not really. I don't think I've reread this book. I have it right here. Oh boy. For our viewing audience.
It's not in a bag.
Oh no, it is.
I actually do have another one that's signed by Liefeld, and that's bagged and boarded somewhere. I actually have the original card that comes with it. Look at that.
Very good.
Ooh.
Look at that.
You got the 2 lame-o cards.
Oh, not the Gideon Sunspot. Come on.
Yeah, boo.
So I remember reading this. I read New Mutants 100 also, just as a primer, just to get me ready to feed it in case there was anything that I was missing. I wasn't, but I read it, and I got to be honest. It felt like, and this is actually a compliment. It felt like a Michael Bay movie. It felt like something where it was just a lot of fun.
Right.
It was. I told Victor, off air, I wanted to draw. Like as soon as I finished it, I had this like this internal feeling that I was like, wow, I need a pen. I need to draw some cross hatching somewhere. I need to do something. I mean, it was the amount of electricity and energy in the book, took me back to when I was 12 years old.
Yeah. And I will happily concede that it is excellent at that. It is very excellent at reminding you of the prepubescent boners you got. That's what it is, and there's nothing wrong with
reference in that.
There's nothing wrong with that memory at all. It's great to remember little boy hard-ons. It's great, and there you go. So we knew at the time we were giving those little boys hard-ons. I don't know if that's the pull quote you want to use.
I call it
to promote the show.
It didn't make me go and close my door with a Kleenex. It made me go to my drawing table that I was lucky enough to have when I was a kid. My parents had gotten me a drawing. Maybe it wasn't at 12 years old, but I was immediately, redrawing comics and writing comics and drawing them. Actually, on the Rogue Wave podcast, which you've been a guest of many times, I've been talking about how I've actually been rereading all the old comics I did as a kid from 7th grade all the way up through college, and there's one book that I created called X Savages. That was my X-Men book. It was EX though. It was not X.
Of course it was, because trademark consideration.
Well, I wasn't going to concede I was ripping it off, but
we wouldn't want to have to sue a 12-year-old little Michael Bolton.
There was a sequence. There was an issue though, and this is again when I was in 7th grade. An issue I read, and I remember reading, going, "Wow, this was actually really good. Like, it was like very suspenseful. They're about to kill one of the main characters, and I don't even remember writing any of this stuff. And I remember reading it and going, that was really good. And I go, I think that was X-Force number 7 that I just ripped off. Yep. And I closed the book, and I reread X-Force number 7 when they kill Sam, and I was like, oh, yep. That's why it was so good. So I was actually ripping off your writing even at 12 years old. So
yeah, good, yeah. So I kind of want to go back to what you were saying about writing for that age demographic. What are 3 things that, really were the benchmarks of writing for that target audience?
You know what, Victor, I don't analyze my own work in hindsight that way, and I certainly don't think about it that way. It wasn't thinking about it necessarily that way at the time. It's weird. It's weird for me because when you ask the question is when I have to start thinking about it, and I wouldn't have thought about it. So I knew at the time the audience we were writing for. I understood the audience that was buying that book. I purposefully wanted to put in catchphrases and sloganeering and snark and sarcasm and a sense of anti-authoritarianism, because that's hugely important to boys between 10 and 14 or 12 and 16 as they're becoming teenagers, that they want to feel empowered to belittle adults. But that's not rocket science. That's not some major kind of psychological breakthrough on my part. I read Spider-Man in the 60s, and that's what Peter Parker did, Yeah. So for me, X-Force was like Michael said, a Michael Bay movie with all the good and bad about that, and to me, X-Force was like skimming a stone across a pond, and New Warriors was me being able to dive under the water of the pond, Nice. So a lot of the themes, a lot of the storylines, not necessarily in terms of the actual stories, but in terms of what the storylines were about, and a lot of the characterization were reflective of each other, but one just reflected the surface and the other reflected the depth, and I knew that. I was aware of it at the time because I was writing both books at the same time. So I knew what I was able to do in one and what I'd never, not only not be able to do, but probably not worth doing in the other. I don't think that I went deeper as I went along into X-Force. As I became the sole writer, the issues certainly became a little more depth to the complexity and the conflict of what was going on than the first year. But the first year is important to set the tone for what your book is going to be about. And I never deviated from what the book was about. I never deviated from Rob's original concept for the book, which I agreed with 1,000%. These are the young mutants who are going to rebel against the status quo mutants have been forced into, both in the Marvel Universe and technically by the nature of the publishing program. The X-Men was going to be the school with the experienced X-Men and the new students, Generation X, we were going to evolve into the new mutants book. X-Force was always going to be the ones that are on the side, the outcasts, the rebels, and that was fine. That was actually a good space for them to fill. I was one of the people internally in the office who strongly supported Rob's idea to cancel New Mutants and launch X-Force. Me and Sven Larson, who was the director of marketing at the time, we worked hard with Bob Harris and with Rob to lobby for those changes, because there were a lot of people who didn't want to do it. Why would you want to? Your New Mutants book just jumped to 600,000 copies a month with Rob taking over as the plotter. Why are you going to cancel it 2 months later? And Rob said, because we're going to sell 3 times that, and he was pretty much right. So that's great. It was great. So in that context, my understanding of the book that certainly fueled into how I was approaching writing it. But I have trouble rereading it, like I was telling you guys earlier, because I read I read it and I see the frustration in me, and I see the anger in me, and I see how I disagree with so many of the choices that are being made, and I see it in my writing.
Yeah, it actually doesn't come across that way, but you what does come across is an attitude. There's an attitude in every single issue that I ended up, and I reread it and I go, there it is. And that actually spoke to me, again, kind of referencing my own work at the time that I was trying to do as a 12-year-old, an in-your-face jam. That was in every single, little book that I did. This is an in-your-face jam. And this is, even just little, nuanced bits of your script, I see them. I see them in all the stuff that I did, because that was the stuff that actually kind of jumped out and spoke to me.
I think if I haven't looked at them and reread them in a long time, I wouldn't be surprised if you reread it again or look at it again, you'll notice there's a subtle shift though. The attitude went from being characters outward, and then it became characters inward. So the attitude started to become self-reflective of the frustrations I was having with the book. and it actually, there came a couple points. I know that like with issues 4, 5, or 6-ish, I think Rob was frustrated with me and told Bob that it reads like I'm making fun of the book, and I was, and Bob, in his ever mighty quest to avoid confrontation, never tried to talk it out and settle it. I would love to have had more of an opportunity to voice exactly why I was frustrated with aspects of the book. But I did the wrong thing. I did the unprofessional thing. I turned it against the book. And if you read those issues, you'll see probably after the Spider-Man, so that's issue 3. The Spider-Man one really bothered me.
3 and 4.
I thought it was a very, very poorly constructed story, very, very, very just badly done. Issues 4, 5, and 6 are when Rob was already starting to plan to leave, and these are things you may not notice as 12-year-old Victor and Michael, but Rob is doing layouts, and he's got 5 or 6 different assistants. He's got people finishing his pencils. He's got 4 inkers inking. He's barely touching a lot of the things other than some heads and faces. And as the writer, I'm there in the process, and I'm seeing it, and it's not working for me. It's just not working. It doesn't work visually. It doesn't work from the standpoint of consistency. I don't think it's professional. So I'm getting very, very frustrated and annoyed. And my choice is to quit. I can quit, but I'm personally stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I know it's just the clock is winding down on how long Rob is going to be there. So what am I going to do? Quit with issue 6? Right. I got a Mike Mignola issue coming up in a couple issues, and that's going to be a lot of fun for me. And Rob's not penciling it anymore, so I got Mark Pacella penciling it in a Rob style. I know that the clock is winding down, so all I'm sitting there doing is thinking to myself, I want to take over this book because I want it to be more of what I think it can be. And so that's why the back half of the first 13 is really just me trying to get to the point where I can start telling the stories myself.
It's interesting too. So actually, I have 2 questions, and they both involve the state of the office at the time. But what you just said brought up another question. How much did you know that he was leaving and planning? And at what point did you know that he was?
We knew from the minute he did a full-page comic buyer's guide ad for a self-published book called The Exterminators, where Marvel's lawyer sent him a cease and desist letter, and he pulled it because he was basically poking the bear to see what he can get away with.
Okay.
And he said, okay, I poked too hard. Okay, I know I got to step back with my poking a little bit. But him and Todd were talking about it. I'm sure they were talking about it from the minute the first issue sales came in on Spider-Man #1, and then a year later X-Force #1. I'm sure that there were discussions. We knew that this was going on through the first by issue. I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure by issue 3 or 4, we knew they were discussing it amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And by issues, just in a matter of a few months, everyone knew, So it had to have been a fait accompli by issue 6 or so.
Did you get like an actual
That's when he even stops penciling. That's when he even stops pretending to pencil.
Right.
I think with the Mike Mignola issue I mean, the one before the Mike Mignola issue was it. That was it. I don't think he penciled another issue after that.
No, he did. He did 9.
Did he do 9?
If it was him, I don't know, but it was credited to him.
I'd have to look at it to tell you how much.
No, I did. I looked at it. I read the first 10 issues. It was great.
If I took a look at 9, I could probably take a look at the art and guess within a 5 percentile of how much work he put into it. Wow. And none of that. I don't want any of that part of it to come across as begrudging or judgmental. No. He's a freelancer being hired by a company to do work for that company. At the same time, he's planning to start his own company,
right?
And he needs to start his own work. It's not Rob's responsibility necessarily to deliver to a level that the company is not expecting of him. It's up to him to deliver to the level the company's willing to accept.
Right.
If the company accepts these pages, that's on the company. And the editor was willing to accept those pages, begrudgingly a lot, but he was willing to accept them because he understood that even 20% of Rob was better for him in his mind than 0% of
correct.
Rob,
right, a Rob Liefeld book is more money that's going to come in than a non-Rob Liefeld book.
Yeah. At that time. And so within that context, that's all fine. I divorced the two things from the business side of it and the publishing side of it and the personal involvement and the creative side of it. Those are two different things, So I can actually speak to both because I was a part of both, you know. And as a result, though, it always makes me seem schizophrenic because I'm switching hats constantly. One hat is whiny, complainy. The other hat is completely understanding and saying it's good for the budget and the bottom line and all that stuff. But that's just the reality of it. That's just the truth of it,
So take me back. My other question was take me back to when the X-Men books themselves, because it's great. You do have this like internal knowledge as well too. We're all being reshuffled. New Mutants was going to be canceled and turned into X-Force. X-Men the second X-Men book was being relaunched. Take me back to the year leading up to that. I mean, what was the excitement level in the offices? You guys were actually behind the scenes creating this stuff.
There was, it was a very weird year, the year leading up to Jim and Rob, quote unquote, taking over the books. It was a very weird year because there was an absolute partisanship within people in the office, between those who wanted to be loyal to Chris and Louise and those who felt that not only does the editor have the right to make changes if the editor wants to, but after X amount of years, no pun intended, a change may not necessarily be a bad thing.
Right.
Okay. So in publishing monthly comics and the longevity that some creative people had on titles back then, as opposed to now, there's never an easy answer. It's almost like a baseball player. When's it time to retire? Right. There's never an easy answer as to when that is. The key to all of it is thinking about it and planning in advance for it, and communicating with your creators about it. And in that capacity is where we all stumble to one degree or another. Okay. Yeah. I can criticize a lot of the things Bob did wrong back then. Bob Harris was the editor, and I can praise a lot of the things I think he did right. And I can also, with the same breath, say we've all done the wrong and the right things ourselves. So it's something that is.
No one's perfect.
No one's perfect, and there's
Social
levels.
Media lies to me. Go ahead.
There's levels of imperfection, and there's frustrations, different frustrations that can be born from those imperfections. So the transition having Chris and Louise leave is in essence was the ultimate transition from the Chris, Louise, and Nocenti as editor troika on that title that ran through the totality of the late 70s into the 80s.
Yeah.
And the transition into the books becoming more forcefully testosterone-y, and much more willing to appeal to a younger reader. And that was an understanding choice on Bob's part. He understood that the audience for his titles were starting to age up, and he didn't want all of those readers to be going to Spider-Man because of Todd McFarlane's cool art, or to be going to something else. He wanted new readers to be coming into his fold. There's also enough rumblings and development for an X-Men cartoon in the works that there's an understanding that we're going to get a lot of young people curious about the books as a result of that. So it wasn't a matter of worrying about continuity, which was already completely convoluted anyway, because we only convoluted it even more ourselves. And contrary to all the critics nowadays, and even some of the critics back then, the numbing morass of continuity in the X books did not deter a single 10-year-old or 11-year-old
not at all
from buying the books.
Oh my God. Can I tell you, that was one of the things that brought me into it, because it was buying a snack but getting a meal out of the whole thing, because you just had so much to feed off of. So yeah, I think the only ones back then and the only ones today who complain about that are the ones who are not reading it through 10-year-old eyes or 12-year-old eyes. They're reading it through 40-year-old eyes or 35-year-old eyes. And some of them have never read it before. So it's almost the same thing with soap operas, where people complain, how do you get into soap operas? It's impossible. People were getting into soap operas on a cyclical basis constantly throughout decades of them being broadcast. So anyway, there was division, guys, in the office. There was uncertainty in the office. These were the top selling books. The editor wanted to take the top selling books to an even higher level.
Right.
And he didn't think that the current creative people he had were going to be able to do that. The sales, although they were the top selling books, the sales had plateaued, and he wanted them to be greater. And the way he went about doing it is not something I necessarily agree with, and I respect Chris and Louise tremendously. I like them both tremendously. I thought both of them needed to lead the titles. I did not lobby for that as the advertising manager, but as the advertising manager, I made the editor aware that my expectations would be that if these new creative people took over, your sales will probably go up 20 to 30%. And direct sales didn't disagree either. So it becomes really difficult. You're replacing a writer who's written a book for 17 years, and it's been the number one book for 12 of those years. You know what I mean? That's not easy.
Right.
Conversely, Chris could have made choices to accommodate some of his own personal vision for the book, for the sake of some of the directions that both the editor and his top artist wanted to go in, and he tried, but it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So that it happened, I never disagreed with. Why it happened, I never disagreed with. How it happened, I never thought was great. And it took a while, because there was a dinner in San Diego, 90 or 91. I don't remember when it was. Probably 90, where Chris is with all of us, and he looked around the table and he said something like, "I'm the last one left." Like, no one around the table was anyone that he had been working with for the previous 10 years. It was sad.
It's funny that could be in any industry too.
Right.
Where you have that sense of, gee, I can't believe, all the people that have come. I mean, at Wizard, when I was at Wizard Magazine too, I mean, just I was there from 2002 to 2006, and, who was there when I started versus, who was getting let go, and especially like toward the tail end of 2006. I mean, it has to have been scary for him, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know all the things that went on behind the scenes. I've talked to Chris a little bit about it, but not that much. And I've talked to, anytime I talk to the, I call them the old guard, previous to me, because I'm the old guard to so many people now. So previous to me,
I'm just old.
I've learned that take anything anyone tells you with a grain of salt, because almost everyone who talks about their experiences in comics, they're always the hero of their own story.
Sure.
You know, and I can talk to the guys from the 70s and the 80s, and they're always the hero of their own story. And I know enough to know that they weren't always the hero of their own story.
Right.
Sometimes they might have been, sometimes they weren't, you know? So I don't know a lot of the things that went on behind the scenes. I think Chris was offered a new book to do, and didn't want to do it because he considered it a demotion.
Right.
The other side of the coin is you can also consider it an oasis. You can consider it your own island. But if that were the case and he chose to say no to it, I also understand that too, because maybe he didn't want to be on an oasis. His ego fears the book not selling as well as the other books are going to be selling, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know all of it. I just know that
I had read that he wanted to kill Wolverine and reresurrect him as an assassin of the hand.
Yeah, there was a whole
and
year.
Bob Harris is like, you can't do that. We need Wolverine in every single book, so we can't.
Well, yeah, there's the, you know, he's got his own ongoing book. He was only appearing in one book at that time,
right?
One X-Men book and his own solo book, but he was also appearing in Marvel Comics Presents as a lead feature a lot. Look, there's the reality of publishing, and I'm sorry if you're Chris, you know the reality of publishing. Mm-hmm. You have two choices: understand it and work with it, or deny it and confront it and fight it. I guess which one is the losing hand, you know? Yeah. And yes, that was his storyline. I never paid that much attention. X-Men had lost me as a reader quite a bit on and off over the years. Mm-hmm. And I was, other than Jim's art, I was at an off period at that point. I wasn't even working at the company and getting the books for free. I wasn't all that into the books. That's interesting because my own personal feelings as a longtime reader of all those titles also fueled into my professional opinion about the fact that changes need to be made. I bought John Size X-Men #1 on the spinner rack at a Krauser's bookstore. You know what I mean? Krauser's grocery store. I bought New Mutants graphic novel #1, and I bought the monthly book as a regular reader. Right? There were ebbs and flows to all of that stuff. I quit X-Men several times and picked it back up again when something interesting looked like it was happening. I quit New Mutants and like with issue after the Sienkiewicz stuff, and I never came back. I actually had to try to find a way to backfill a bunch of my issues when I started working at Marvel, like going through people's piles and closets.
Okay.
So as a reader, I was of the opinion that the books needed change. So to me, it was something that it was okay to do. It wasn't necessarily okay how it was done. So by the time that they announced we were going to do X-Force #1, which really was both story and commerce driven by Rob. Mm-hmm. His from Rob's standpoint, his radical shakeup of the status quo, it almost demanded a new issue #1 and a change.
Right.
Okay. The reason an X-Men #1 was happening was because Jim wanted to get in on the McFarlane-Liefeld sweepstakes.
Sure.
They wanted to give Chris a graceful bow out. Mm-hmm. So by getting him to write those last 3 issues, he gets to write a story of worth and merit with a fantastic artist in Jim Lee, and he gets to cash some gigantic paychecks, right? So that was almost the compromise and the rationalization everyone made to try to live with the choice that half of the people were uncomfortable with, and even the half that weren't uncomfortable with the decision were uncomfortable that it was being made. You know what I mean? Yeah. There was no joy in Mudville. There was nobody was going, yay, he's gone, yay, he's gone. Nobody was doing that. Right. Everyone was sort of like, yeah, you know, if you were for it, you shrugged your shoulders and went, no, I understand. And if you were against it, you shrug your shoulders, you go, it's not fair, it's not right. So that was really the mood within that capacity of the publishing program for a year in the office.
So this is my last question, and this is a letter from New Mutants 100, which I thought was actually kind of funny. So Vincent Betts, I hope you're okay with me reading this letter that was printed in the back. It's funny. I just started reading this book. That's New Mutants, with the introduction of Cable, and so far he's the only character I really like. But the book is one of my favorites. The art and stories are that good. It takes a heck of a creative team to keep a reader involved in stories about characters he doesn't even like. These are the problems I have with the present team. Cannonball, stupid hat. Sunspot, stupid, boring, generic power. Rain, gone, stupid. Richter, gone, stupid, funny haircut. Warlock, dead, somewhat foolish. Boom Boom, she's okay. Yeah, this X-Force better have some roster adjustments. Well, Domino looks interesting, and I like Cable, but this book needs Deadpool. I don't think I can get by without a monthly dose of this character. If not in this book, use him somewhere else. Please don't let him fade from sight. He is way too interesting. We've asked this to you many times on previous podcasts, but I have to ask you.
I think I've answered it the same way every single time.
Did you have any idea? I mean, if you look back at X-Force #1, right, when it came out, you would say Cable is going to always be one of the most important characters in the Marvel Universe. The X-Men books at the time were huge, as opposed to now where it's the Avengers books that are actually more popular than the X-Men books, although Jonathan Hickman's trying to reverse that trend a little bit.
Yes.
And Deadpool is probably the most iconic. He might even be more iconic than Wolverine at this point. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree that he's more iconic than Wolverine. He may be better known than Wolverine, but I don't think he's more iconic.
Okay, fair enough. But in terms of
from the definition of iconic,
fair enough. No, fair enough. You get what I'm trying to say, though, right? He's actually more well known right now. I think maybe.
I think that if it hadn't have been for the downturn in the industry and the direct market and the loss of the newsstand through the mid to late 90s, Deadpool's popularity would have been greater then. And it just took a generational cycle longer for it to attain what it initially started as. Okay, because that letter printed in issue 100 of New Mutants, you said. The reason that Bob probably wanted to print that letter is because he knew from the minute we got mail reaction, and take into account, guys, this is before the days of the internet. This was when there were Usenet boards, but it was only very few people, and most of them were older who were participating on the Usenet boards. Talk about whiny man babies. The Usenet boards used to be hilarious. It was like its own little version of Comicsgate back then. So we knew from within days of New Mutants 98 being released, guys, we knew that Deadpool had done something. He had tickled someone's fancy. He had poked someone in the belly, because 75% of the mail we got on New Mutants 98, and I've done this many times before. This was the usual stack of letters for New Mutants. New Mutants 98 got this much, all right?
Wow.
And I know because I got it all out of the mail bin before it got to Bob. I would steal letters from the mail chute for the books I was writing because I wanted to read them before the editors got to them. Only one editor ever said, all the mail we're getting on this book has already been opened. Did you get to it? And one editor, I said, yeah, I got to it first. And they're like, oh, okay. But I read all the mail before it got to Bob. I saw how many of them were saying, that guy was funny, bring him back. He appeared in 7 pages of New Mutants 98. He didn't appear in 99. Right. Issue 100, someone's getting a letter printed, which means he must have written it with issue 98 or 99, right?
98.
A few months later, they made Deadpool one of 5 trading cards in X-Force #1. Right. Why would you make a marketing decision like that? And it is a marketing decision, unless you understood as a publishing program there was something here worth stoking. We can turn this little flame into a fire. Okay, there's several reasons why that was delayed. Ideally, there should have been a monthly Deadpool book within the first 6 issues of X-Force coming out, and X-Force should have led towards it. Okay, but there were a few things that delayed it. Number one is Rob's plot was requiring a year-long story arc with Deadpool as a recurring villain supporting role. Rob, who would have normally plotted the the first Deadpool miniseries, and I would have scripted it, was never really going to do it because of everything that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He gave up the ghost on pretending he was going to do that one and focused on pretending, and I put pretending in quotes because in his mind I know he really wanted to do the Cable miniseries,
right.
but he was never going to be able to schedule-wise. So
right.
on that one, we kept waiting to see if he was going to do it, and it was only at the last minute that he said, "I'm not going to do it," and that's when me and John Romita Jr. took over. Right?
Still one of my favorite miniseries too.
It was. So I knew we were going to do a Deadpool miniseries. I was already breaking it down in the back half of X-Force Year 1.
Mm-hmm.
I already knew pretty much where to go with it. Then the delay happened more because Joe Madureira was drawing it, and Joe was really, really slow back then, just as he kind of is now. But he was also 19 years old back then. So the Deadpool miniseries came out it came out in 94, right? It should have come out it could have and should have come out at the back half 92, early 93. And it didn't come out till the middle of 94, I think. So that was the delay right there. And it still sold 300,000 copies an issue, right? So it was the industry downturn, the lack of commitment on the part of the editor to the nature of the character. He wanted to soften him up way too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a mistake. It was an editor who was being asked to guide a character that was a combination of Bugs Bunny and Frankenstein's monster, and it was an editor who didn't understand Bugs Bunny. It's just, I mean, there's a lot of good things I can say about Bob, but I cannot say that he has a very facile sense of humor, and he doesn't necessarily understand humor in books. He thinks he loves drama. He loves angst. He loves soap opera. And he's great at guiding that. But when it comes to dark humor and snarky humor, he's not that good with it. And he would let me go sometimes, but you got no idea how many fun, good lines he cut from books that I did. Because it's not his DNA, right? So he had a real hard time with Deadpool. And it took him becoming editor-in-chief and not being as focused on any one individual title that allowed Joe Kelly to get to do what he did. And the fact that all the books were selling lower and lower and lower, he had other things to worry about, Right. So he didn't necessarily worry about Joe doing some Bugs Bunny shtick in the monthly book, or breaking the fourth wall, making fun of Peter Parker in a flashback issue. That it's almost because it became beneath his attention. Right. But it wasn't then. So there were a lot of reasons why Deadpool didn't jump to a greater degree within the first few years of him coming out. None of it had to do with the character himself. It was almost all stuff that was imposed on him by forces beyond his control. Poor Wade. So the increasing popularity through the age of social media from 2008 and 2010, when YouTube really started to kick the character into high gear, leading into the movie in 2016 was the first movie. That's actually the progression for the character that could have been back then.
Yeah. Well, Fabian, I want to thank you for joining us for Wednesday Forever X-Force #1. A lot of behind the scenes. We'll definitely we'll have to flag you again for some more awesome content. This has been Wednesday Forever. It's part of the Rogue Matter podcast network. So go to roguematter.com for more and tune in for future episodes.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you. This was fantastic.